This is Canada Reads American Style, featuring two friends who love Canada Reads and Canadian literature. Welcome our host Rebecca from Michigan and Tara from Ontario.
Hi everyone, it's Rebecca. And our good friend Colleen encouraged us to read one of her book club titles, and she reached out to the author on our behalf. So we are excited to chat with David Giuliano, who is a spiritual guide, writer, and speaker. He is an award-winning writer of fiction and nonfiction books, essays, and poems. The Undertaking of Billy Buffone is David's first novel and the one we'll be chatting about today. His collection of essays, Postcards from the Valley, Encounters with Fear, Faith, and God was a Canadian bestseller. It's Good to Be Here, Stories We Tell About Cancer is a spiritual memoir about his 20-year journey with cancer, to which he brings fierce honesty and humor in a conversation about the metaphysics of medicine and the power of story to heal. Welcome to the podcast, David.
Oh, it's so great to be here. Thank you.
Great. Well, we always like to jump right in. So I just want to say that Tara and I absolutely loved this book. We just chatted a lot about it after we read it. But can you, for those who haven't quite yet read it, can you give us a synopsis of the novel?
Sure. The Undertaking of Billy Buffone takes place in an isolated small town in northwestern Ontario, where a person of certain gravitas, importance in the community, has been preying on boys in the community for a number of years. And at the beginning of the story is killed. And main characters are Matthew, who narrates the story from the life beyond this life, and his best friend Billy Buffone, who carries a secret with him that Matthew leaves when he dies, and Catherine, who is the newly minted minister at the local church and who develops a romantic interest in Billy. The story, in my mind, is about forgiveness. It's about healing. It's about the collateral damage caused by trauma in a community and the ways in which that heals and the importance of forgiving oneself.
It's beautiful. Thank you.
And those are three great characters too, David. I really love them. But I loved Matt's presence throughout the book, and which you mentioned he is deceased in the book, but he still acts as a first-person narrator throughout the book. Can you discuss your use, like why you decided to use him in that way?
Well, a number of reasons. One is that I really liked, blanking on her first name, Sibold's The Lovely Bones, and a story told from narrated by someone who's died. But it felt important to me for it to be someone who was somehow the third person didn't feel right for a story like this that is so intimate and personal, and that the first person seemed to work better. It also was that, there is a perspective that I think we only ultimately ever gain from an awareness of our mortality. And so he has I feel like Matthew, for someone who dies violently, has a kind of easy concern for the other characters in the story that I appreciate. Mm-hmm. I keep forgetting. Yeah, and I wrote it. I so often, I got to know all these characters so well. I really do think of them as other people, but yeah.
And I think it's funny because, I kind of, wouldn't it be lovely if after we're gone, we do have that ability to sort of see the people that we love and to see them kind of carry on. So I loved just the idea of that as well. So, yeah. Now, one of the things I thought was really interesting is there are Indigenous characters in the novel. And I wanted you, if you could, to talk about, you pay great respect between the Indigenous spirituality in the story and the Christianity in the novel. And I wondered, is that a more current attitude, or did that exist in Northern Ontario during the time the novel was set?
Well, the novel takes place in three decades, the 60s, the 70s, and the 90s. So of course it would change over that time, but most of the interaction with the Indigenous communities, Pickerel River is the fictitious name of the community, happened in the 90s. And there was a growing respect, and there has always been. I'm fairly connected with the Indigenous community that's next door to the one I live in, and there's been a great deal of respect. But I have to say that was probably the most difficult part of the story to write, because as a non-Indigenous person, as someone from the settler culture, I wanted to take great care to not be telling stories that aren't mine to tell. On the other hand, it seems so false to leave Indigenous communities out of a story that happens in an isolated place in northwestern Ontario. And I took the opportunity to raise some of the issues like residential schools and the disproportionate representation of Indigenous people in prison and so on. But to your question about is it as good as it sounds in the book, probably not, and
Mhm.
still not.
Mhm.
But one of the things I am aware of is that those people, certainly the minister, Catherine, would be respected and welcomed in that community by a lot of people. And Billy, of course, as the undertaker, would have had lots of interaction and built a trust and respect with folks there. I had some things in the original version that reflected more of kind of the racist things that are very much a part of life in a community like 26 Mile House. But I had a pre-reader from an Indigenous perspective, and he recommended that some of those things be taken out. That he said he didn't feel that they could be that it would just be experienced as a racist slight. Like I think of there was a scene where Billy's talking to the bartender at the Legion about planning a funeral of a kind of a hermit who had died, and she said, really, I don't know anything about him. He comes in once a month and points to the beer tap with his chin like an Indian, and that is something that could be totally said. But the reader who gave me some good advice on how to do that said, no, leave that out.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so I out of respect for the person who did that work, for us, I just felt like, well, I have to. But you're right. I think it does lead to a more sanitized version of reality, and it's a huge range. I mean, there's great respect on one end and none on the other.
And I have to say too, there was a scene with Catherine when I can't, I'm trying to think if it was in was it, was it in a sweat lodge kind of setting? And she
Oh, it
was
is.
just so
Mhm.
respectful. Like even what she said to herself was like, I don't know if I should do this or this or that. And I thought that felt very just real, because I
Mhm.
think we all would have been in that, would have had those thoughts in that setting. So I thought that was
Oh,
beautiful.
yeah. They were having the 3-day fire for Gilbert, who was a young Indigenous man who dies in the story, and I know that feeling of Catherine's. I've lived it exactly, almost, of, do I have any right to impose myself on these sacred things that are going on inside? And, she wrestles with that out in the rain outside the 3-day fire in the teepee, and enters and is accepted into the circle in her own way. And but also feels awkward about not noticing the tobacco she should have offered, and pronouncing miigwech poorly, and those kind of things.
Thank you.
So, David, this is a very dark subject matter that you've faced with this book. But speckled throughout, there are these beautiful, humorous moments. Like I would be weepy eyed reading one chapter, and then like the next page, I would be giggling. Like there was you just have these beautiful little moments. Could you discuss why or how you used humor in this book?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I would say, isn't life like that?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
One, especially the intensity of grief or whatever. One moment we're weeping, and the next moment we're laughing. But for me, it was really important, especially for the victims of Scouter Churley, that they were three-dimensional characters, that they weren't, okay, this is the victim and this is the perpetrator, and this one's traumatized, and their life is, and I guess the thing is too is I don't try to be funny, but I think from Matthew's perspective, watching the foibles of human beings, it's just funny, like not things you do that, Catherine wanting to ask Billy to go for a coffee, and kind of loneliness can make you really foolish, or at least take some big risks. And she, so those are funny things, or a lot about Billy, which are I found reading it over after, like funny, but also like I almost make me cringe a little bit. And he's been living as a bachelor. He doesn't close the bathroom door, like stuff like that, I think is very, very real. And when we read it in a novel, it sounds funny.
Yeah. I think the first moment, I'm not going to say it because I don't want to ruin the funny moment for those who haven't read it yet. One of the first funny moments that I had, I actually kind of went, wait a minute, because I'm not expecting it. And I went, wait a minute. Did she just, because it was Catherine, I'm like, did she just say that? And I had
know
to go
exactly
back
what you're
and
talking
yes,
about.
you know what I'm talking about. And I'm like, did she just say that? I'm like, I think she did.
But tell me you've never done something like that.
Oh no, of course.
And
That's why I
realized
think I
later.
loved it.
Oh my gosh, the times I've done that, and then I'm walking along later, and I think, but no, I couldn't have.
That was a great moment.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to get real serious now here,
Sure.
because my question, so after Tara and I, when we read it, after we were done, we chatted about it. And in the conversation, we both sort of see Billy and Matthew as Christ figures. We sort of examined like how they appeared and everything. And we just saw them both as Christ figures. Can you talk about that? And also, so there's that one thing, but also I love the symbolism that runs throughout the novel. There's the bear that appears in the story. Were very specific about the number of ravens, and so I'll have to offline tell you a story about my number of ravens story. And then there's the whole concept of it's Easter time and redemption, and then Bart. I'll just throw that out there. We don't want to give away too much stuff here, and the hot cross buns. And so I wondered, how important is it that the reader makes the connections to those symbols, or does it not matter? Like, I mean, I feel like either way, whether you see those symbols or you don't, the story is incredible. But how important is it to you as the author who's written it for people to make those connections?
I cannot tell you how happy I am to hear that question.
Yay.
Because I have always loved reading novels and, thinking, oh, I see what the author's doing, a symbolism or some subtle representation or those kind of things. But I think it also, the novel stands on its own, I think, just as a good story as well. Our daughter's husband, his mom, read the novel, and afterwards she texted me and said, I just finished our novel. And I thought, that's odd, our novel. And then it dawned on me, of course, every piece of writing has what the writer intended and what the reader read. And they aren't necessarily the same story, but there's this richness in the conversation that comes from it. So yes, it does matter to me, the symbolism. And I intentionally included that because I think in metaphor and symbol a lot. And so it wasn't like I sat down and said, okay, now I'm going to do this and that, but that's how stories come out of me. Doors were a really important part, stepping through a door, not stepping through a door. Catherine going through the door on the cave, that fits perfectly into the opening, those kind of, those really do matter to me. Bears are a symbol of healing in this part of the world. Ravens, of course. I have a bit of a thing for ravens. I sometimes walk in the cemetery. I've lived in this small isolated town in Northern Ontario for 35 years. And so I sometimes go walk in the cemetery, and I'm not kidding you. There's a particular raven who remembers me and
Mm-hmm.
hops along with me while I visit the cemetery.
Yeah.
And so I maybe he fed it one time. I don't remember feeding it, but so I'm really aware of how nature kind of does that with us. I was really interested in your observations about the characters being like Christ figures. I really, I mean, intentionally and aware, had Matthew in that way, putting
Mm-hmm.
down his life for the life of someone else,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, making a sacrifice in that sense. I hadn't thought about Billy, but if I do, I think of Billy kind of more like Peter, who let Jesus down. I mean, Peter who
Oh.
denied Jesus before he went to the cross and had to had to go on living with that failure, and how he must have somehow had to deal with that to become who he became, according to the gospel stories. So, yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna have to go back and look at that again because I mean, you wrote it, and I think you're right.
No,
But I'm gonna have to look. I'm gonna have to
you
go back and
finished
look at
you
it.
finished our novel.
There you go. Oh my gosh, no, really seriously. I'm gonna go back
Yeah.
and kind of look at it again and see that kind of that role as being Peter. That's
Yeah,
interesting. So
I
yeah.
want to
and
go back
and
and look at
Billy
the
of
doors.
yeah, and Billy of course, and then getting out of the opening, Florence putting Billy out the door into
Hmm.
the storm. Billy getting out of the car in the middle of the storm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but and then of course, yeah, the Easter allusions are not they're not particularly hidden. I mean,
Yeah.
Billy rises.
That's
Yeah.
another great moment.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think that's kind of where we saw that was that
Mm-hmm.
why we kind of thought of that because it was Easter and he does
Mm-hmm.
survive, and so I think that was a little bit why we kind of thought that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, thank you for that. And yeah, that's I don't always see the symbolism in things, but it was funny because when I saw that in the chapter, it said 6 ravens. And I thought, well, that's awfully specific. And so I said something to Tara because I looked up what does 6 ravens mean? Because if you look it up, it does tell you what this many mean and this many, et cetera. And then the
Oh.
next time it was 7 ravens. So I thought, well, okay, so he must, that 6 and that 7 must mean something. And it does mean different things, slightly different things.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I picked up on that. And I don't, Tara, did you at the time the numbers stand out to you or no?
No, I remember you mentioning it to me, and I was like, "Oh, I didn't like the ravens stuck out to me, but not the numbers." And you texted me, and I was like, "Let me know what you find out," because I knew you were going to research it. So
They're very important in, well, of course, in indigenous communities, they're the trickster, and
Yeah.
hmm
in some cultures that they analogous to Jesus, the trickster. But for me, I mean, I grew up as a kid, the ravens in folklore and fairy tales and things like that, and the roles they played.
okay, David, throughout the book, the power of words is mentioned several times. In the end, does Billy find the power of words?
I think he finds the power of words in being he finds that speaking the truth is empowering.
Hmm.
So they begin his healing in many ways, but it's the ravens at the end of the story. To me, it was really important that the community be present.
Yeah.
In that moment, so I had to figure out a way to get them to the highway,
Mhm.
and but it is like I think there can't be healing for an individual without healing in the community. Like so
Hmm.
one individual being healed doesn't heal the community. People, it's a thing we participate in together, and so it was really important that they were there, and him beginning to voice that what secrets he's been carrying for all his adult life was I think he experiences liberation in that, even though it could mean trouble for him.
Hmm.
But I don't think he could do that without Catherine, without the feeling that she was there for him,
Yeah.
that she could trust him. I mean, that he could trust her, and that. But I love Thomas King. His Massey lectures, he always began with the truth about stories is that stories are all we are, and that it's the words that we speak and are spoken and heard that shape us as human beings. So I think those little words that he needed to confess was the beginning of, perhaps a long or a short period of healing and self-forgiveness.
Okay, David, before we sign off, we want to know what you are currently reading. What book?
I had to look quickly. I just got off the 5 days on Lake Superior at the Ignace Islands group kayaking, and so I thought the only book I had with me was a guidebook and a paperback, Robert B. Parker, which I bring because I can read a quick little bit and go to sleep in my tent at night. But what I'm actually just finishing is Why Men Lie by Lyndon McIntyre.
Oh,
I what was it I read? There was one of his I read. I think it was The Winter Wives, and then I'm sort of like I read an author and I read everything I can get my hands on. And I understand you two are librarians, so let me just say a moment of thank goodness for libraries and librarians. But I get whatever I can get by that author in the library. Then that's what I'll read for a while. So it's Lyndon McIntyre right now.
Well, I will just say I'm not a librarian, David, or no, Rebecca is,
Okay.
and Shauna, who was one of the original hosts, also was. I'm just a intense library user, so I am also grateful for librarians like yourself.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and I have to say, one of the things we do often is we promote our public libraries. We often do that on our Bookstagram accounts because public libraries are just so important to all communities, but especially communities in need. I mean, that's what we're there for as well.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. Well, David, this has been really just such a pleasure to chat with you. And again, I just want to give another shout out to our great friend Colleen for suggesting this book to us and kind of connecting us with you, because I agree with Tara. This is one of our best reads this year in 2022. And we just really look forward to what's coming next. Or do you have anything? I know that this hasn't been out that long, but do you have something kind of planned in the future?
I've got one just about ready to go to the publisher.
Oh, excellent.
And I just was working with an editor, and I'm going through and doing some more work on it before I turn it over to the publisher to see what she thinks.
Great. Well, we will be definitely reading it. And maybe at that point we can have you come back and chat with us again.
That'd be great. And thanks so much for the invitation. And if you don't mind, I would just say that if people want to know more about the Undertaking of Billy Buffone or about other things I've written, they can find it on my website at davidgiuliano.ca.
Great. And we will put that in the show notes as well. So David, thank you so much.
Thank you, David.
Thank you for joining us on our bookish journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing Canada Reads American Style wherever you listen. You can connect with the podcast and Rebecca on Instagram at Canada Reads American Style and with Tara at On a Branch Reads. Until next time, keep reading.